Hello, welcome, episode 5 of Newb Perspectives. Today we're talking about social stuff in role-playing games, social encounters, social games, social interactions, role-playing, all the things.
Mm-hmm. Very well put, Tyler.
Everything that does not involve you being alone.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk about interacting with players, interacting with NPCs, interacting with player characters, all the different aspects of interacting. So, obviously, I am the host of this episode, Tyler. We've got
Leah. Sarah.
And sorry!
We would wear name tags, if that was helpful.
Oh, yeah. Peer through the audio.
So, the first question I have for everyone is, what is your experience in a social game? And before you state that, I would like it if we defined what you mean by a social game when you're talking. So, like, do you mean a social game as one where you talk to each other, talk to NPCs? Like, what's your definition of being social in an RPG? Doing a social thing in an RPG?
It's an excellent question. Oh gosh. I mean, I think to me, like, thank you, Car. Being social is, like, it encompasses everything. I include being social with the other player characters as well as NPCs, but I think more in game terms, I consider it anything you have to roll for, or, like, things that, like, contribute to a storyline, to the game, things that have challenges. So that would be like getting information from an NPC. I think even like shopping episodes, if you have those in your campaigns, those are just that kind of social aspect because you're going out and you're buying things. I mean, usually I've played in campaigns where the DM plays out the shopping campaign fully, but I feel like there's definitely some out there where people just skip that.
Which I can understand.
Yeah, I think I do a little bit of both. It depends on what you're purchasing, and
yeah, same.
You know, if you're going down to the local blacksmith to buy a sword, I'm not super concerned. But if you like want to find some rare items or something like
or like
that,
bartering
then,
for things
or
at
bartering,
like a local
yeah.
market.
Yeah.
Or...
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just like I want to pay full price for this thing, I don't care, just I want this over with, then yeah, we don't have to role play that all out.
Yeah.
So you said that it involves something to do with a role.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I find interesting.
Same.
So what did you want to add on to that, Tori?
I guess I don't feel like it has to be necessarily role-based. Like, I feel like there's definitely other means of, like, role-play. Because, like, you do have, like, you know, like, the, like, I guess almost like you were saying, like, the investigative aspect of, like, going and trying to get information out of NPCs and whatnot. But I think even potentially, like, inter-character, like, if you are kind of, like, developing in some setup or, you know... I guess one of, like, the, I guess, kind of more classic ones that I see more often is, like, you have, like, the, like, lawful paladin and whatnot who has, like, their creed and their oath and how they hold themselves. And you have, like, the rogue who's trying to, like, loot stuff off the rest of the party and whatnot. Like, you can have inter-party kind of points where you can have this kind of social roleplay aspect that can really help kind of give development to the different characters, whether, you know, maybe one has, like, a big moment where they kind of come into something or, like, have realizations about themselves. And I don't think that necessarily needs to have roles for that to count as, like, a social role-play encounter necessarily within them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just because of how important it is sometimes to have characters interact with each other.
Yeah.
For example, you and I, Sarah, are playing at a very slow burn romance
So
in one of our
slow.
games. And it's fun, and it's...
Character development is dope.
It's a good part of the game.
It is great.
Though, I think, Sarah, you were, when you're talking about rolling, I think you're talking about interacting with NPCs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you can actually roll for doing anything to a PC.
I've seen people
Some
ask...
DMs.
Some DMs do that.
I've seen people ask for people to roll when they're unsure how their character would react.
That's another, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Actually, come to think of it, I think in one campaign, a player character joined, and they were just straight up lying about their entire personality and the reason they joined our group. And I think for the big lies, it was like they actually had to roll deception against everyone else to see if we picked up on things.
Dang, what game was that?
It was in Nico's campaign, so my D&D campaign. Someone joined in and said like, oh yeah, like I'm from this church, this like following, and I sure would love to join you guys, and like they were acting so sweet and innocent, like they've been living in that church their whole life, and then we learned more and more about their actual goals and personality, and it was just a whole 180. Like their whole appearance was a deception, their backstory, like it became frustrating because we as players knew that everything was bullshit, but we had to discover it as our characters too.
And
that's pretty cool, actually.
it is pretty cool, but I feel like that also is like, at least something I've always tried to avoid when I kind of do my own campaigns, is because it is very hard as like a player. Like obviously everyone tries their best to like, I guess not like allow like that kind of stuff that like they actually know and are to affect the decisions, but to a degree, you can't do that infinitely. Like as a player, fundamentally, you having that knowledge is going to weigh on things you do and like how you make choices. It just is.
Just subconsciously. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like having a party know that the entire time and like then making their characters figure like any of that kind of stuff out, it can be a good tool, but I always try to avoid it personally or be very careful with it, because like it does make the roleplay side of things a lot harder when you're trying to make decisions without using information.
Yeah, I think something that could work is if you do that.
Ooh,
Bless
you.
I do loud sneeze.
Edit that low.
I think something that you could do is make that encounter, like that deception piece, if you're afraid of it sort of like permeating into the players' mindsets, you could have it like be a shorter term thing.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine doing that as like a long-term setup, like
like a whole campaign based around trying to figure out that one of the players is evil
when you know they're evil the entire time.
Yeah, it's a little bit
it'd also just be kind of, I feel, frustrating to roleplay that.
and a little bit like, I don't know, it brings into that concept of what if the player is better at something than their character. Like what if the player is better at figuring stuff out than their characters? How do you do that? We're gonna talk a little bit more about that, especially related to charisma and that stat, regardless of what you call it in a game, that like most games have that kind of stat or that kind of skill, like and some characters are better at it than others, and some players are better at it than others, and they don't always coincide. So, with that, we've mentioned a lot of words. We've mentioned the word role play a lot. But what I want to do is get your take on what is role playing. What does that mean? Could you summarize that in a couple of sentences?
I mean,
my elevator pitch.
Yeah, your elevator pitch for role playing. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. That's role playing. It's just, to me, it's any time that you take on the characteristics of your character when you kind of just imagine, okay, how would they take this? How would they react to this? And that's how you influence your play style, or how you influence like your response to a situation or an interaction. So kind of like with mine and Leah's characters, the slow burn romance in our one campaign, like that kind of just influences our role playing in very subtle ways. So like if there's ever like we're running away from something, I'll stay behind until her character catches up, and it's kind of just putting those small details in to be like, this is the flavor that my character adds to the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, I think at like at the end of the day, like, yeah, it's hard to, I guess, say have like a general synopsis, but like it's really, at least in my opinion, the most important part of any of them. Like, it is a role playing game. It is built into the title, like with it, like that kind of role playing social aspect of it, and it really is the ingrained nature of everything you do to a degree, down to like how you interact with one another, how you carry yourself, even like in fights, like how do you kind of go about that, and how would your character and who you are do that, and how would they interact with the things. And it really is kind of to me, at least from what I see, like the backbone and the basis for which really everything else kind of is built off and built around. Like you play these games so that you can kind of get into this world, and kind of for whatever reason, you know, leaving kind of your normal day-to-day life to kind of put yourself into these worlds and kind of putting yourself into this other person's shoes and really getting into that character and getting into that social aspect of it is really the core of the entirety of this style of game.
I agree with everything that's been said. Role-playing is just a vague form of acting.
Yeah.
Where you're not following a script.
So that's kind of what I wanted to I'm glad you brought up acting, because
Kind of like improv.
yeah,
to a degree.
so is that what role-playing is? Is role-playing acting?
I think it depends. For some people, it might be. Like, if you're kind of going something that's, you know, entirely out of your comfort zone, it might be more of like an act, or more of like an improv thing to kind of like pull out, like, what do I think this person would do? Versus, you know, some people then prefer, like, rather than kind of pushing out in that way, they like kind of going into the world, but they like their character still kind of being in their own comfort zone and kind of playing even potentially a character that's really more based around how they would do things and whatnot, to which I wouldn't know if I'd call that acting. I think that's just kind of putting themselves into this world.
I feel like a lot of first characters
Yeah.
are like that. Like, a lot of the
100%.
times when it's like, oh, my first character, it's like a representation of yourself, like a fantasy or
because it's a lot easier
Yeah.
to know how you would react because it's you.
Yeah.
Very true. I think that's even like the most seasoned players find like traits of themselves in their characters.
Oh, totally.
For sure.
And it's just an easier way to relate to what your character will be going through.
Yeah. Or it's like a really common thing to like look for like pop culture references that you're super familiar with.
Right.
Like the first character that I ever created in D&D was a because the first ever campaign I played was D&D, and I created a character who was just ripped straight out of a book that
True.
I had read like a book series, I guess, that I'd read a lot of. So, like, having that
Which was
knowledge, it was Dritz the Orden.
Oh, right.
The Drow Ranger.
Which book was that?
It's from the book called The Legend of Dritz.
Appropriate.
That makes sense.
It's written by R.A. Salvatore. Great books. He's got like 30 friggin' books out.
Hello, cat.
He's got like 30 books. So many books. It's
lot
like
of
the
books.
Forgotten Realms, sort of. It's all written by him.
Cool.
And other people as well. Like, now it's being written by more other people. But he sort of created that world.
Yeah, I think that's also a lot of fun. It's like the tabletop RPG version of a fan fiction.
It kind of is, yeah.
You're taking something that you really love and you're making it into a medium that you can kind of control and explore.
Exactly, yeah. Like, almost like a more interactive video game, right? Like, it's like you get to make your own video game with this as the main character. Another thing related to the acting that I wanted to talk about is, how do you feel about third-person descriptions in social encounters? So, as an example, there are like two ways that I can think of that you could approach interacting with an NPC are, straight up saying exactly what you want to say. So for example, you want to convince the NPC of something, and so you lay out your argument, and you say exactly what my character is saying. Or you could say, my character convinces them, I have some evidence that I found before, here's a couple of pieces of evidence. Which one do you like to do? How would you, like, do you consider both of those role-playing? What's your stance on that?
Oh god, that's an excellent question. I think I struggle sometimes with matching what I think my character would be capable of in a situation. It's hard to be like, I've got high charisma, like, I am a bard and I'm gonna seduce the hell out of this dragon, which is like the fantasy of fantasies. Not for me, but like in RPGs.
For all bards, the ultimate
bards.
goal is seducing something or someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's usually the case. But it's harder to match what you want the situation to be, so it's easier to be like, my character does this in such a way and it's supported by the role. But like, a lot of characters also just want to be like, and I say this and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that the key thing there you mentioned is the role.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you are doing more of like I'm doing a third person, like this is what my character says. My character would say something like this, you know, and then I roll my dice and I add my modifiers, or I roll or whatever, and then the dice dictate how well I put those sentences together.
Yeah, that's true. The dice roll also adds an interesting beginning. Like, if you wanted to, you could approach a social situation and say, I'm going to try to use charisma. And you roll first, and then you decide what you say afterwards. Like, if you roll a nat 1, you say, oh, I compliment them on their hairy arms, and I think they like it. They don't.
Yeah. I think for me, what I've at least always somewhat kind of tried to do is at least, like, try to kind of, like, explain, like, you know, like, what my argument would be to a degree. Like, I guess, like, it is hard when it's, you know, a subject that you don't actually know about as a player, but your character would. But the way, at least I've always tried to, like, at least, even if it's not right, kind of give something towards the general vague idea, which would seem correct, and then the role can kind of describe whether it works or whether it doesn't.
Okay, like, more of, like, the role is more of, like, how you string the sentences together rather than the evidence that you're providing?
Yeah,
okay.
Kind of like you're like, how well can you convey that, or how well you present it, kind of. And I think that can also help as well, because what I've done at times with as a GM for that kind of a thing is, like, even if like the players, you know, like, aren't necessarily super well versed in something, but at least have some knowledge, if they, like, are just like, I'm gonna roll to try to convince them of this, it's like, okay. But, like, if they come in, they're like, I'm gonna try to convince them of this, and, like, this is what I would say, and, like, they have all these generic points and whatnot, like, depending on how well they do it, I may give them, like, a circumstance bonus to the roll, or other things, as, like, you know what, like, you've made good points, you've brought out good things, like, that will benefit you in making that attempt. So, like, it's not required, but it's almost, like, rewarded and can be more helpful.
Yeah, it's a good way of doing it.
I think that brings up another question.
Always the questions with you.
What? So
question, man.
Yeah, I have no answers, just questions.
Oh wow, that's appropriate.
What is the difference then? Like, how do you justify player skill versus character skill? Because if I'm a player, and let's say I'm a very eloquent speaker, right? I'm very good at like the convincing and whatnot, but my character is an orc barbarian with 8 charisma, right?
Yeah, not strong with that.
And you know, the player strings together this elegant speech, but would you still ask them to roll the die? Would the speech itself be be sufficient for convincing of whatever you were trying to do?
Yeah, I think to a degree, like, at that point, it also just kind of comes down to a general concept as well of you as a character. Like, you need to always try to work on matching your character energy, and I think that even, like, is just kind of a generic thing that, like, you should always be trying to work for as a player. And I think as a DM, like, you need to, like, sometimes keep in check with certain players, even just, like, as a reminder of just, like, hey, like, I know you can kind of do this thing, but, like, you can't project that necessarily onto the character if it doesn't make sense. I've had, like, characters that I've DM'd for where, like, they have, like, a very heavy science background, and then they're playing, like, a druid which doesn't have, like, you know, like, low intelligence, but, like, it's all based around, like, nature and flora and fauna and whatnot, and then they start, like, pulling out math and physics concepts because they know about it as a person, and it's like, yo, like, yes, you have intelligence, like, yes, but, like, you gotta make sure that, like, you're keeping in the scope of, like, your character. Like, yes, you could know, but, like, why would your character know that? Like, if they've lived in the woods and they're, like, the whole time, like, why do you know physics? Like, and all, like, the names and terminologies and things. Like, so there's a degree of, like, being aware of who kind of your character is and, like, trying to make sure that you keep in that.
So is that the point then you would ask for that roll and say, hey, this roll will tell me whether or not what you're saying, like, is strung well together, or what you're saying, or maybe, like, you have some...
Yeah, I think the roll is a good, like, important thing, because if you roll high enough, then it's like, okay, sure, your character doesn't have a great stat for that, but somehow you found a way to finesse it. But even if they string together something very eloquent and, like, nicely put, if they roll low enough, you can still flavor it, like, if they're of one race and they're talking to someone of another race, it's like, unfortunately, you were trying to say something that's pretty eloquent in like orcish, but there was some translation error and you insulted their mother and
Yeah,
Oops.
yeah.
Big oops.
yeah. Because go ahead.
You really need the role to be there.
You do.
Mm-hmm.
For it to be a balanced game.
Right.
Because, like, you don't have to roleplay being good at punching, because it's something you do in real life.
Right. Charisma and intelligence and like all those mental stats are definitely a different beast.
It's not something you do in real life. You're not like, I'm gonna punch Sarah, and then you roll to see if you punched her good in the game.
Yeah.
It has to be there, otherwise you could feasibly have a character who's good at everything because you just happen to be bad at things you're good at in real life.
Yeah, Tyler
That
wanted
would
me to
make
make
sense.
an attack roll, so I gave him a pretty strong right jab in his side. And because I was so good at that, he gave me a circumstance bonus. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
would give you a circumstance negative because you just punched your DM.
Just threatening him.
So yeah, so that's really interesting. I'm still struggling myself with the like balance of that and like how to tell players or how to give players bonuses for that kind of thing, because the thing is I think I would give players bonuses for like strength based, dex based, con based things if they had a good reason for
Right.
why they would be able to have like a bonus for the situation.
Like, I know to lift with my legs.
Well, like or like if it's a dexterity bit, maybe they're like doing some acrobatic stuff and they're like, oh well, I specifically put on good shoes for this circumstance so that I have traction on this type of
think
floor.
That's
Maybe
fair.
that would give them.
Yeah.
So it's more about the preparation that their characters do.
Yeah, I think the way I've done it personally, and obviously no idea if this is right or wrong, but it's worked, at least my thing, is if I'm going to give bonus for any of this kind of convincing, I'm purely deciding that going to give that bonus based off of the meat of the argument. I'm not paying attention to how you flavor it
Yep.
or how you go about making the argument or how you try to persuade or anything like that. That kind of, to me, is where the role is kind of coming down to. But like, if you can kind of just come out and just like, you have like just solid like, hey, I'm looking like, for this person and like this is a sketch of them and like this is something, and you're trying to get information, like if you have that kind of just meat behind it, that does just make it like I think that deserves a bonus, because it's hard to terribly phrase like providing physical blatant points or evidence.
Yeah.
So like if they're doing that kind of a thing or that kind of a setup, I feel that's where I would award it, if like the meat of what you're kind of trying to say is there rather than just the flavoring of it.
Yeah.
Versus then kind of it comes down to how you want to role play it and what the role dictates into how well you actually do it.
I mean, I think there is maybe an argument to be made for giving bonuses for the way you say things, but like not in a like they're good at talking way, but like if you're using a different skill, there's always the option for you to do something on accident that works.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
so that would apply also, I think, probably in social situations.
Like
Where maybe you didn't know something, but you happen to say something that the NPC knows about.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of spark something.
Yeah, and going back to Tyler's point, I like that you brought up. I like that you brought up role playing in terms of like the other stats, like strength or dex, and that's like, I think you should be able to get a bonus if you reasonably say like, oh, I'm gonna move this thing by like pushing it a certain way, or like knowing that like there's a hill here, so it's gonna be easier to push, or like things like that, where you just build more I don't know, life into a situation where it's just like, yeah, you're making a good point for why this could be an easier thing to do.
A game that really handles that really well is actually a game that doesn't have any of those stats, but it's all skill based, right? It's Fate with the aspects,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh, I have this aspect of they have a guilty face, or I have a convincing piece of evidence,
Or a great storyteller.
or great storyteller, or maybe you have the aspect of running downhill, or all of those things are mechanics built into the game, so it's really nice for players to be able to use those to their advantage. So it is, you're right, role-playing is one of the 3 words, and in fact it is the first word. Not sure if that matters, because game playing role doesn't, it doesn't really work. But my point is, the word game is still in there, right? And so player skill needs to be expressed somewhere in there, I think. Right? And the player's ability to manipulate the mechanics of the game should be celebrated.
Yeah, like you being able to actually play it well.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Including, like, not just in the combat situations with tactics and stuff, but, like, outside of that as well. So we've talked about what role-playing means to us. We've talked about how, third-person role-playing is just as good, if not better in some situations. To the whole, like, spelling out exactly what you're going to say to convince someone or to talk to an NPC. What do you feel about character voices?
Oh, character voices.
I have the one way I've kind of come to do it, at least for me personally, when I'm DMing. Usually for me, actually, as a character, I don't typically, but as the DM, to have a separation between when I'm actually, like, trying to give them information in game versus, like, when we're just, like, talking about something, I will typically give, like, voices to characters, but the one thing that's always kind of weird in mine is I have terrible memory and I can't write down what voice I use for every person. So it's kind of like one of those, you're gonna know if I'm referring to a person because they will have a voice to them, but don't expect it to be the same if they come back at a later date, because I cannot ever remember that.
Yeah.
I've tried doing, like, little, like, notes here and there of, like, oh, it was, like, vaguely this or vaguely that. It never ends up working well. It's just kind of like, you know what? Who knows? They're Scottish today and maybe they're Irish tomorrow. Who knows? We're along for the ride.
You're pretty set, though, because I've realized, like, through being part of your campaigns or just listening to you DM other ones, you have an NPC voice. I hear it and I'm like, oh yeah, he's an NPC
exactly.
right now.
Yeah.
It's
like,
just common amongst so many. It's just like a generic tone you take.
Correct.
Okay.
Which kind of helps, it kind of helps break the gap between...
That works.
As an NPC and then just kind of as your DM.
I've never used a character voice as a player because I guess my throat doesn't do that, doesn't want to, or my brain doesn't want to. Who knows?
Yeah.
And it's less of a voice than it is just a slight inflection.
Can you give us an example?
I don't want to.
That's fair.
I think that I like doing character voices as a DM. As a player, again, I don't do it because of the inconsistency it might bring. So it's not quite good for me in that sense. But if as a player, sometimes you're not talking as your character. And if you don't have a voice for them, or you don't have, like, a way of being like, I'm now talking as my character, it can get confusing sometimes.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes as a GM, when my players also don't have character voices, I'm like, did you just say that to that guy? And they're like, no, I was just saying that out loud because it's funny.
Yeah. I do that a lot.
It's definitely one of those situations where I would like it. I would like it if my players had player or character voices, because it would be a little less confusing. But I can always just ask them, and I have often asked them, did you just say that to that person? And they'll be like yes or no.
There's also the, I guess, benefit that we have in that one where we're all like pixies, with the exception of one now.
Yeah.
But for a while we were all pixies, so it's just a matter of, as we've left kind of like the Fae and we've kind of gone into like the normal plane. Did you just say that to that person? Nah, we said it in Sylvan. And it's like, oh. And then you just get a lot of people that give us confused looks, but it's like, cool, you definitely didn't hear me plotting about robbing you later or whatever else, because now you don't know Sylvan.
Yeah, I always deal with that kind of situation by, if we're in a place in the game where there are NPCs around, I only ever talk as my character.
Okay.
Yeah. Or my sentences start with, Hey, Tyler.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good
yeah.
indicator.
That's a good one to do as well.
I know. I usually just reference like, "Hey God," as like a just referencing the GM.
I don't like
I
that.
per-
I don't like that moniker.
Really?
Nethies will be so mad at you.
I don't know. I do that a lot. I call all my DMs God.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's probably a topic for a future podcast, but
All hail the DM.
Can we do 30 minutes on whether or not we should call you God?
I dislike that as a moniker because of what it implies about the power of a DM and like their role in the game.
That's fair. I mean, they do control everything.
I was gonna say,
Do they though?
Yes.
I just like see that. So for me, I think that if you're a DM that thinks you control everything, then you're playing it wrong.
Did you hear that, Sarah? You're playing it wrong.
Well, not
I've never been God.
not wrong, but like it's not how I envision my role as the GM. So as the future podcast, this is a tangent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that as a GM, my role is different. Like my role is not to be the almighty being who knows all and creates all.
I guess,
GM, God Mighty.
Yeah. I guess to be fair, the one comment I'd make to that without proposing like causing a long side tangent. The one main point I'd say to that though is I would still agree that in terms of power, you are, because you do have that. It comes down to how you use it.
Yeah.
A good DM will use it properly.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you do have the power of a god. You can do genuinely anything.
Yeah.
You shouldn't do everything.
Yeah.
And it's that's a good point of like a good DM is knowing where to use the power and where to not. But to say you don't have it, I feel is a completely separate point.
I guess,
you definitely do.
I don't know. I like it when players
using them right.
create parts of the world too, though.
Oh, agreed.
So like I can think of one example like that sticks out in my head is, and this is actually kind of related to social gameplay, so this is good. We're bringing it back on track.
Bringing us back.
And it's when actually you did this. So you were talking with an NPC. You just saved their child from a slave trader caravan.
And remember what this was?
This was in the north. In the cold place when you guys ambushed the trader caravan, there were some.
It was while the city was surrounded by bears.
No, it was before that because they were the caravan was ran by bears.
Right.
Or it was like the caravan
like the
was
bears
being pulled
were
by
horses.
bears.
I feel I might know where this is going.
So you saved them. You went to go tell the parents that their kid was saved. And then the dad started walking somewhere, and you were like, "Hey, you're going the wrong way." And the dad was like, "Oh, you're right, I am." And then turned around and walked the other way. Which, to me, if I were God, I could not make that mistake. Right?
Correct.
But I'm not. I'm just the facilitator. Anyways.
Because you're using the power well.
And also I think that other games other than D&D and Pathfinder like explicitly like curtail DM power, like specifically Fate does a lot, and we can talk about how that relates to games in a different episode. I think that's getting too far off track. So bringing us back to character voices from that. So generally we don't do them as players, but as a DM you have like a DM voice.
Yeah.
I have a similar thing as a DM. I like to do voices for my characters, mostly because sometimes there are multiple NPCs in a scene, and it's important to know which one's talking.
Yeah.
Of course, you could always do the classic thing that like books do, and it's like the main or the you'll say like the innkeeper says this to you, and then the janitor says this to you.
Right,
and
just like really narrating.
Exactly. And that works perfectly fine. What I like to do is I like to write like literally 2 or 3 words about what my NPC sounds like. Like honestly, it'll just be like as simple for me as like flamboyant Seth Rogen, and that'll be
It's a quality note.
Wow.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah,
of flamboyant?
I also would really like an example of flamboyant Seth Rogen.
I don't have a flamboyant Seth Rogen voice. I just thought it would be funny if that were.
See, this is why you're not God. God would have it.
I did have one where I didn't the NPC never ended up coming into play. But it was written as passive aggressive Shia LaBeouf.
Amazing.
Where he would had this idea where he would say, "Why aren't you just doing it? Why can't you just do it?"
It's beautiful.
And that would be like, and that was like my whole motivation for that character in that scene.
You say that line to get in the character,
Yeah.
get that voice.
Yeah, and so that's how I would get in the headspace of a character. Just read those 3 or 4 words, and that would get me back in the space. Obviously, again, like that's not for everyone, like we've discussed here. And then the narrating works just as well for tracking multiple NPCs in a scene. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of stuff in this episode so far. One thing that I want to talk about that we started talking about before the podcast was DMPCs. What a DMPC is, for those people, what it is to my understanding anyways, from what I've read and heard about, how we're going to talk about it today, is it's basically a character that the DM is playing that is ostensibly part of the party.
Yeah.
So an all the DMs, the DM plays all the NPCs, obviously, but most of them are not. They don't stick around for long periods of time. They may be recurring, like you may have to go back to this person like throughout a quest or something, but they aren't with the party for long periods of time in a row. So to me, a DMPC is an NPC that sticks with the party for several sessions in a row, for maybe a whole adventure or something like that.
And as well, usually like is at points like actively kind of contributing to everything, not just sitting there and is like, yep, this is Steve. Steve just stands here with the party and will attack things when everyone else tries to fight things. But is actively sitting there and trying to like help guide the party and help kind of steer things potentially, which can definitely get into more trouble because at the end of the day it is your DM doing it, and if your DM is now just kind of there just to kind of steer you as a party through this NPC that they've like put in within your setup, it does to a degree kind of remove your agency as a player to kind of control what you're doing and where you're going. Like you could just say like, nah, forget Steve, screw him, I don't care, I'm not going that way. But like it gets a lot more complicated because then it comes down to like, as a player it's like, well, with me and my character, like, this is something I kind of want to go do, or this is something I want to go, like, kind of look into. But, like, Steve is really talking about go checking out that castle on the outskirts of town, so, like, I guess that's where we're meant to go. So, like, do I guess just go do that so we can advance the plot, or do I actually do what I want to do? And that can kind of put players into a weird situation.
Like a weird decision matrix that you have to do. Yeah. Something that I find interesting about DMPCs and about DMs like interacting with the party is what information you do and don't give, and how you talk to them, because as a DMPC sometimes you're often you have like like an actual character built, like they're like if the party's level 4, you're a level 4 PC essentially, right? You don't even take like an NPC from a different book or something like that. So the other thing is like, do these DMPCs have like more power than the other players? Maybe not. But do they have more information? 100%, because the person playing them can see behind the screen, so to speak.
Correct.
Yeah. I've never had an experience or any campaign that I've played in where there was actually a DMPC involved. So I can't really...
Yeah.
I think I'm the only one who has experience with that.
Would you like to speak to it?
Of course I would. Anything for my podcast time.
You could have stopped with, would you like to speak? And Sarah would say yes.
This is true. But yeah, so in my campaign, it's in D&D, And so we have a cleric on our team who was brought in because we're getting close to the end game, so it's like we're about to fight the big bad, and so our DM was like, oh, like, maybe your team needs a healer, and so we've picked up the healer and we've brought her with us, and it's become a point where they are deeply ingrained in the social aspects of our party. Like, all the characters love her, and, like, will protect her, and it'll be so sad if anything were to happen to her, and so we've become emotionally invested, and I think a lot of people call that, like, adopting an NPC, when you just, like, fully bring it in and you make it so that the DM has to bring them along with the group. And so that's a lot of fun, actually. I really enjoy that.
Yeah. I think that might be something else. Like, or it's a different, like, as a subgenre of DMPC, right?
Like, you guys have done that.
Yeah.
You guys adopted, like, a fire demon that you named Elsa.
Yeah.
So cute.
Which did not match the fact that it was a fire demon, but you guys, like, adopted that thing and was like, okay, guess that's staying around now.
We gave it so much trauma.
I didn't expect that thing to stay around at all. I thought it was just a random mob, one of, like, a bajillion of them in a dungeon, but you just kept it and adopted it, and it was like, okay.
When you phrase it like that, I remember that when we ran an evil campaign, you guys accidentally adopted a wizard who wanted nothing to do with you, but you destroyed his castle, and then promised him you would give him a castle back, so he followed you, and you never did.
We all died. It's not our fault.
I didn't die. I was thrown to the bottom of a river.
Yeah, you're the ring from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, basically.
A hobbit will find you one day.
One day.
One day, yeah. Maybe we'll come back to that.
And then my evil will rise again.
Yeah. For reference, he was a sentient gun.
I was not a living.
I didn't have that context.
Yeah, I was
he
not
was
like
a sentient gun. He didn't need to breathe. He just wanted to murder people, and then he ended up at the bottom of the river because the boat they were on exploded.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, something like that.
It was a warlock setup where my, like, patron was a deity who just, like, to make me, like, more lethal was like, cool, I'll make you fully lethal, and just turned me into a living weapon.
That's some genie bullshit right there.
And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's your experience with the NPCs. I have mixed feelings on that idea.
Really?
Because
would you like to speak to that?
You know what? No, I wouldn't. So, like, yeah, the idea of the DM being part of the party, I don't know, it feels like, I mean, I keep bringing up the phrase role-playing game, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone has their role in the role-playing game, and I feel like the DM's role
is not to be
part of the party.
Yeah.
But I do think that might be a different situation. It might be like, I don't know, a morally gray area here, or not morally, but like just a gray area where the DM didn't create this PC to be part of the party, but the party decided that they were.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a compliment to the DM. Like, you created an NPC that was so great, we want them always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're making sure to only say good things, whatnot, because I'm pretty sure also to a degree your DM listens to this as well. So.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Nico.
Only saying good things about what he's doing.
Yeah. No, I have all the love for Nico's DMing style. I think when you can find a good DM who's able to incorporate, like, all the different aspects of combat and social and, like, the perfect ratio to keep you so engaged, it's perfect.
Yeah. Nico's a fun guy. Not that you're not, Tyler.
Called out.
What if, okay, so we've got DM PCs down. I think that we've decided that, if a DM creates a PC to join the party, that's not necessarily a great thing because of all the knowledge and information that they have. And, like, there could be some, not necessarily nefarious, but, like, some unconscious bias towards certain actions that the party could take.
Yeah.
What if you have a game with, like, 1 or 2 players and you're the DM?
I wouldn't run it. That's just not enough players to run it.
There are systems built to have fewer players in them.
Like
we're looking into buying a system that was meant for just 2 players.
Fair.
Like, and there are, like, GM-less systems and stuff like that.
GM-less systems.
So you wouldn't. So you would. So
Yeah.
you wouldn't run a DMPC in a game where there's few players in order to sort of fill out the party.
I don't think it would work well. And I guess like it's very fair to what Leah's saying. Like it would depend on the system, but like if I was running like Pathfinder or like D&D or like something along like those, and I had a 2-player party, no. To me typically, at least personally, I typically try to keep it so that if I'm going to be running a session, like one shots I guess are different because it's only a single thing. But if I'm like running a campaign. I personally would not be going really below 4 or like above 6, probably at the highest I'd be willing to take.
I've played campaigns where we only had 3 people plus the DM.
I was DMing one of those.
We DM'd one of those. All of our shots are those. But I played in a full campaign that was like that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't...
What? No. Yeah, I DM'd that campaign.
I meant not that.
Not the Metroville one?
No.
A different
Oh, okay.
Like a full, like it was like a full year long campaign where it was just...
Okay.
But also it wasn't the combat based campaign. So there wasn't any of like the you have to modify the difficulty of the encounters because there's only 3 people inside. It was actually mostly social intrigue.
What system was it?
It was in the Burning Wheel.
Okay.
Actually.
Yeah. So I think it depends on the system because like certain systems like that where it's more built around that I can like see it potentially working.
Yeah, I mean
for more combat based ones, at least personally I wouldn't.
Okay.
you'd
Yeah,
have
that makes
to
sense.
you'd have to build your characters in a functioning party because
Because
Because you
of-
don't have enough people.
if you have 6
Yeah.
players, your characters don't have to be as fully optimized
Yeah.
for their specific role because someone else will fill the gaps.
Correct.
But if you've only got 2 players or 3 players, it's a little bit less. I do remember actually now that you brought up a small number of player count and you being in one. I actually DM'd one of those, the Metroville campaign with what was it? It was like Red Dawn but different.
What's Red Dawn?
It's a movie from the 80s.
Yes.
Where the Russians attack the U.S., some like small town U.S.
Spicy.
And like a bunch of kids rise up and defeat the Russians.
Quality movie reference that totally all the rest
They
of us
remade
get.
it with not Chris Hemsworth,
Sure.
his brother Liam Hemsworth, I think.
Could be.
And this time, not the Russians, it's the Chinese.
Oh.
Different communists.
Anyways.
Anyways, so yeah, that was the style of game, but it was mostly like a spy, like sort of like not trying to fight things because the things that we would be trying to fight are an army of Russians, and that's definitely not the situation that we want to get into.
Nobody beats an army.
I don't think there's anything low with low player count requires more out of the GM a lot of times because they have to modify things because a lot of rules in things like D&D and Pathfinder are written for 4 to 5 player.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
But some games aren't, right? Like the Burning Wheel.
The positive of even a game like that with low player count is when you have a lot of players, each player gets to play the game a little bit less because they can't all be
Very
involved
true.
at the same time. So I
Bringing it back to the social.
I
like it.
almost I almost took part in a campaign of what system was it? What's that game with the game you like with the magic people and the dark stuff and where the elves are all slaves.
Oh, Dragon Age?
Yeah, the Dragon Age role-playing game. I almost played in a campaign of the Dragon Age role-playing game, but it was 8 people.
Oh, jeez.
Wow.
Nope. Not a chance.
That's a
Eight
lot.
players or
8 players.
Way
and a
too
DM?
many.
Yeah, they
So
were
9,
Yeah,
jeez.
because it was a DM that I knew who offered to run a campaign, and there was too many people interested in being a part of that campaign that I had to back out because that's too many people.
That's a
That's
hard thing.
insane.
I wouldn't even join as the 8th. Like,
Yeah.
because exactly what you were saying. Like, every time you add another person, that's more time. Like
a percent of the time that's getting cut from you, right?
Like the moment a combat occurs, it's like cool. Like I guess in an ideal world, you have like, yes, the board changes, and yes, you have to kind of adjust what you're trying to do based off what kind of happens in the interim. But like, you have 7 turns in that kind of a situation to figure out what you're doing, but no one does, and you always end up in just a situation where it's like, cool, I do my actions, and then like, you have to wait for 7 other people to kind of figure out what they want to do, and then get all their stuff done before it finally kind of comes back to you, and it ends up, and it's like, cool, we just did like a 2.5 hour combat, and I had like 4 turns.
Plus more monsters and stuff usually, right? Because there's more players, so they have to fight more things.
It's just... it can get bad.
Even in social aspects, it's
that's
hard.
what I was gonna do.
Yeah, because I mean, you have so many people. Like, you're not gonna get enough like, you know, screen time. Like, enough time to do what your character wants. Like, if you split the party and certain people go one direction, other people wait, you might get the instance of like someone going off on their own story, coming back, and then trying to join and take up your time. I mean, I've had that happen once before, where I was waiting for a long time for like, after the party was split, for everyone to join back in so that I could be able to roleplay something. And then as soon as we got back, the person like wanted to join in or like do their own thing, and like I had to wait even longer to kind of get going.
It's definitely a thing. Like, if you think about it, even like mathematically, right? If there's 4 players and a DM, each person could have about 20% of screen time. Yeah. Right? Because there'd be 5. But the more players you add, the less percent of the screen time ideally each person gets. Right? And obviously it's never going to be perfectly that percent in every given session, but hopefully it averages out to about that much. But like, if you're sitting there for 3 hours and you get to quote unquote play the game for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, that just feels...
It's not fun.
Yeah.
It's harder to get into the role-playing aspect, because you're taking such a large break that your head gets out of the space, and then it's harder to like get back in and like properly be your character.
Yeah, it's also harder to be invested in the other characters in your party, like socially.
When there's like 12 of them.
Right. It's like if I'm in a party with 6 other players or 7 other players, I don't know all of their backstories, or I'm not like, or I might get them mixed up, and I'm not gonna remember their names. Definitely not gonna remember their names.
When your party becomes less of a party and more of its own guild.
Yeah, exactly.
You start to have issues.
It'd be kind of funny if you were just a guild of like 10 players, except most people couldn't make it most weeks.
I've seen that.
So that is actually a style of game.
100%.
There's a whole, like, I think it's called the something marches. I forget. But like, basically how it works is like, there's a DM and like 30 players, and like they'll mix and match the players every week to like run adventures, like, that are usually like 2 or 3 like sessions long. And then you like, next adventure you'll be mixed with other people, because like the idea is you're like part of an adventuring group or guild, for lack of a better word, and like they'll just be like, okay, you 6, you're going on an adventure this week, cool, go off on your adventure. And so that's kind of how that sort of style of game works. So that's a thing that can happen. But usually, even within that 30-person structure, on a given session, there aren't that many people in the game.
Yeah, I had never heard of that kind of style. That actually sounds really interesting story-wise.
Because you get to do more sort of like smaller pieces that are all like working together towards a larger story.
As well as you can really kind of give yourself into kind of those characters as well, because then you get a degree of like stories that like you and other people may know if the rest of the party doesn't, and it's like, oh, you know, like you 6 are being assigned out to like go fight this, and it's like, oh, like, you know, I don't know what we're doing. With 2 of them, you know, been in a party before. It's like, oh, well, you know, like we've gone out and like, you know, like we've hunted down these birds before, and like, you know, it like seems like it could be related to like that kind of thing. And like, I have reference to this that like I may have seen before that you can like then contribute to the party, and you can do things with that.
I remember the name. It's called West Marches. It's called the West March. It's like a style of campaign.
Very cool.
I don't know that many people.
No, usually they're like online.
Oh, okay.
I see like Discord servers for them sometimes.
It's 30 of your friends.
30 of your closest friends.
At that point, get into extended friends or friends of friends.
Oh, that's too many friends. So yeah, definitely. Number of players impacts how social you can be for sure,
Very
whether it be
heavily.
too small or too large. To summarize that conversation, which meandered a little bit, but that's okay.
One,
So
doesn't it?
so we've talked a lot about different games, different social parts of games. Are there and I think we've been mostly talking about the physical aspect of doing the socializing, right? Like how we talk, what we say, what matters about what we say, and how we say it. What I want to bring up next is, are there any systems with mechanics that have that promote social play, or that have like interesting social mechanics involved?
100%.
Yeah, the one that first comes to mind is the Burning Wheel, just because it has a combat system. Well, there's like a combat system, more like a very convoluted dueling system.
Yeah.
And then it has an equally complex and convoluted social fight or argument system
Called the Duel of Wits.
and it's a lot, but also it's the most rule supported talking I've ever done in a role playing game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because Fate does a similar thing to Burning Wheel. So the way that Burning Wheel does it, the Duel of Wits, is basically like a copy of its dueling system physically, except different actions you can take.
Yeah, some stuff isn't there, like you don't have to be farther or closer away from each other.
Yeah. There are some aspects that are important in combat that aren't necessarily important in the role play or in the social dueling bit, but in Fate, it's the exact same thing. Like the way that fighting works. There's like a whole section in the book. It's called like combat or conflict. Contest and some other C word that means fighting.
Conflict?
Conflict, maybe? What? I think I said that one? I don't know. Anyways,
You said
so...
combat.
No, not
contest.
combat. Not combat. Combat's not one of
You
them.
said contest.
Contest, conflict, and something.
Okay.
Cool. And so they're basically like describing the scale of the encounter.
Okay.
And they're like, hey, contests work like this. And it doesn't matter if it's a fighting contest, if it's a debating contest, if it's, whatever. Contests are, I believe they're the one-on-one or usually maybe like one-on-one sort of things. And they usually break down into like debates or arm wrestles or, boxing matches. And then there's like conflicts, which are larger scale. And there's a third one, I'm sure of it. But anyways, the point is they use the exact same system for fighting and social, but I think it works way better for social. Just because it's less detailed in the fighting.
I looked it up. It's challenges, contests, and conflict.
Yeah, challenges. Okay, so challenges are the small one then. I'm pretty sure.
Seems like they're in the order of least.
I think challenges might be
largest.
the individual one, where it's like individually you do a challenge against like an inanimate object. Is that what it is?
I have the definitions up.
Okay.
So
Hit me with
challenges,
it.
when one or more characters try to achieve something dynamic or complicated. Contests, when two or more characters are competing for a goal.
Okay.
Conflicts, when two or more characters are trying to directly harm each other.
Okay. So those three systems don't tell you whether or not there's like fighting involved, because the thing about Fate is you can fight verbally too. Like you have like a will.
You can cause social
you
harm.
can cause social damage.
Yep.
Whether to their like ego or to their social standing itself. So that game has really cool systems in place for dealing with the social sparring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you can finish what you're saying.
Okay. So, what about games that don't?
Pathfinder.
Pathfinder, D&D, that
D&D.
kind of thing?
There's-
Do not.
there's a lot of role-playing games that have social aspects but don't have rules directly related to the social aspects. I guess Fiasco's technically not a role-playing game.
I would call Fiasco a role-playing game.
Right, so you don't really gain or lose anything from being good or bad at talking, and there's no die rolling in Fiasco. It's just writing a story together. It's not really a role. There's very little rolling, minimal rolling involved.
I think you roll at like the start of the game and
You
at
roll
the end,
once
and
at the
that's
start
it.
and then you never roll again.
I think the other one that I guess I can't speak more to, but you can, is also Bubblegum Shoe, which is very social.
But it's social, but it's also that exploration aspect that we did last week with the investigating.
Yeah. I think it's got both pretty well.
It does have both pretty well. It has very little, if any, combat. It's not built around that at all because you're high school students solving mysteries like the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. So, like, and it involves very little rolling as well. So it's like if you have the skill, then you do the thing. At least for the most part. There are some skills that don't work like that. But as a general rule, that's how it works.
Yeah.
So like, so that's a pretty interesting.
Doesn't as much have like the explicit rule support, but is a system that's definitely built a lot more around the social aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's other systems I'd be interested in trying. Like, I purchased Alice is Missing a while ago.
Oh, the text-based one?
Yeah, it's not something we can play on the podcast because it's literally built to be played via text message.
Yeah, and like silently.
Yeah, but it's a GM-less game.
It's pretty. It seems pretty cool.
So it's sort of run by. There's only one scenario. I think it's just like one shot you run. It comes in the box and it has like a couple of cards and things. But it's meant for you to sit in a room and like make group chats and talk to each other via text message about like a missing girl.
Her name's Alice.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my god, really?
I would have never guessed that.
I think so, actually. I haven't played it.
It's like a thriller. So the game consists of nothing other than texting each other.
Huh.
Sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
It bringing up more like obscure role playing type games. I can't remember the name, but there's this one romance role playing thing.
The one with the Jenga tower?
The one with the Jenga tower.
I'm sorry, what?
Instead of roles, you have to use like a Jenga
several.
based tower, and the different blocks represent like different events or like challenges or something. I've never played it, but
Right.
it
We're
seems
playing
like
Truth or Dare.
No, there is a thing, weird, I don't know if it's a subgenre, but there's a lot of different roleplay games where instead of rolling a die, you pull a block out of a Jenga tower.
Weird.
Like,
But
it comes
interesting.
in horror games too, and then there's a romance one. Wood block tower sold separately.
yeah, which is
course.
super interesting.
No, okay, that's pretty cool. That's an interesting mechanic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the whole game is like you're two lovers, but like you're essentially like Romeo and Juliet style. Like there's something separating you. You have to like overcome certain odds to be together.
Yeah.
Sounds adorable.
It's
But I
cool
don't have a
stuff.
Jenga tower.
Yeah, I have a Jenga tower. You know, I almost stole one from Tyler's parents' house. But I didn't.
Should have. They aren't gonna use it.
I think my parents have Jenga, but it's like edgy Jenga where it's like green and it's like different shapes. Like it's not just like the rectangles.
Oh.
It's like they've got like angle, like
Oh, that's weird.
45
So
degree
literally,
angles to
there's
them.
lots of edges. Got it.
yeah.
Is it more edges, or is it just...
Different.
feel like
I
that
think
would
it's the same amount of edges,
that
but
would
there's
just
like
make-
slants.
I feel like that would just make Jenga objectively harder.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's like
Is that the
Jen-
goal? Is it
I
supposed
think
to
it
be?
was like
But-
Jenga harder.
It's Dark Souls Jenga.
Apart from Dark Souls Jenga. Yeah.
So, okay, summarizing what we've talked about today.
Many off-topic
Yeah,
things.
we figured out we've sort of discussed what role playing is to us, how it works in the game, how to deal with charismatic people that are playing uncharismatic characters, and vice versa. We talked about NPCs. We've talked about our favorite social mechanics like the Duel of Wits and like Fate's conflict system.
Yeah.
And we've talked about ones that we don't necessarily think are very robust, like the Pathfinder and D&D systems. They do have like feats and things that you can do to make your characters better at things, but it's less robust, I think, than those
systems built for it.
It's it's not that it's less robust. It's that it feels less like interesting to play.
Yeah.
And,
There's also you can tell the care that to interject on your summary. You can tell the care that Burning Wheel puts in its social aspects because the traits that your characters can pick out and gain, they directly affect it. Like you get certain traits will give you a +1 to Duel of Wits.
Yeah.
So you can tell how integrated that social aspect is to the whole game structure.
Yeah.
Well, there are also like feats that will give you like pluses to diplomacy in certain situations in the other systems.
In Pathfinder and stuff, yeah. But like you can tell just by like the sheer percent of the rulebook that's dedicated to those things in Pathfinder and D&D and games like that versus games like Burning Wheel.
Very much so.
Where they write a novel to describe how to take you through a Duel of Wits.
It's a lot.
So I think that kind of wraps up our conversation on social encounters, at least for now. I'm sure that we're going to talk about them throughout other podcasts and throughout other topics. Because, again, these 3 pillars that we've talked about in our last 3 episodes, our last 3 discussion episodes, are sort of like the main things that take up all RPGs. So obviously we're going to talk about them in our other conversations. But for now, that's it for our general sort of overview of those ideas and our opinions on those. Next time, we're going to do a role-playing social encounter session one-shot thing.
Eloquently put.
Exactly. So I would roll and get a 20, and then it turns out I said it very well.
Yeah, now you guys understand perfectly.
Exactly. And so we don't know what system we're going to play in yet. We also don't know who's going to DM it yet. To TBD, pay attention to our Twitter. We have a Twitter now.
Tweet.
You can follow us at Newb Perspective, but the last E is a 3 because it was taken. Because Newb Perspectives is too long and Newb Perspective was taken. So follow us at Newb Perspective, the 3 at the end. We also have a Discord server, which has we have a link to that on our Twitter profile, so you can find that there.
As well as give suggestions for episodes and other things.
Exactly, as well as give us suggestions for episodes and other things. So thanks everybody, and thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.